I used to believe that some people were permanent. The kind you don't question, don't double check, don't guard yourself against. He was one of those people to me. A friend, someone whose name never raised alarms in my chest. That day began without wait. Just another afternoon that didn't ask to be remembered. We were walking through the forest the way we always did, slow, unplanned, following no particular trail. The air smelled of damp earth and crushed leaves. Sunlight slipped through the branches in thin, broken lines, warming patches of ground while leaving others cool and shadowed. Our footsteps were soft, almost careful, as if we didn't want to disturb the quiet. I trusted the quiet. He talked about small things. Things that didn't matter, a story he half forgot, a joke that didn't quite land. I laughed anyway, not because it was funny, but because that was our rhythm. Easy, familiar, safe. At least, I thought it was. I remember how relaxed my body felt. Shoulders loose, breath steady. There was no tension in me, no instinct whispering to stay alert. If anything, I felt grateful for the escape, for the trees, for the company. Being alone in the forest with him never crossed my mind as something to fear. Why would it? He had never given me a reason. Sometimes he walked ahead, pushing branches aside. Sometimes I did. When our hands brushed against the same leaf or branch, it felt accidental, meaningless. I didn't read into it. I never read into him. Looking back, that's the part that hurts the most. There were moments when the conversation dipped into silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Just pauses filled with birdsong and the distant sound of wind moving through the canopy. The forest felt like a private world, cut off from everything else. No phones, no people, just green and brown and light. I didn't notice when the light began to thin. The path narrowed, though I can't say exactly when. One moment it felt open, and the next the trees stood closer together, their shadows stretching longer across the ground. I slowed without realizing it. He slowed too. Our footsteps fell into sync again. I remember thinking how strange it was that time felt slower there. Like the forest had its own rules. Like nothing bad could reach us. There was a moment, small, almost invisible, when something shifted. Not a sound, not a movement. Just a feeling, faint and easily dismissed. The kind you ignore because acknowledging it would feel rude, dramatic, unnecessary. So I ignored it. I kept walking, kept trusting, kept believing that friendship was enough to protect me. If I had known that this was the last moment of that belief, this calm, this ease, I would have held onto it longer. I would have paid attention to the warmth, the quiet, the way my guard was completely down. But I didn't know. And the forest didn't warn me. The forest grew quieter in a way I couldn't explain. Not silent, just muted, as if someone had turned the volume down on the world. The birds faded first, then the wind. Even our footsteps sounded dull, swallowed by the ground before they could echo. I noticed it too late. He stopped walking. I took 2 more steps before realizing I was alone in front of him. When I turned back, the distance between us felt larger than it should have been, stretched thin and heavy. His expression didn't matter. I couldn't have described it even if I tried. What mattered was the shift in the air. The ease from before had vanished, replaced by something tight and unfamiliar. I asked if everything was okay. My voice sounded strange to me, like it belonged to someone else. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer. Not fast. Not aggressive, just close enough that my instinct stirred, confused and late. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. My shoulders stiffened, my breath shortened. I told myself I was overthinking. That this was nothing. That friends stood close sometimes. But this wasn't the same. When he spoke, his words didn't land properly. They blurred together, heavy and wrong, like they didn't belong in the space we were standing in. I remember shaking my head. I remember saying no, once, maybe more than once. The sound felt small as soon as it left my mouth, swallowed by the trees. Everything after that fractured. Time didn't move the way it should have. Moments stretched and folded into each other, leaving gaps I still can't fill. I remember the ground beneath my hands, cold and uneven. I remember staring at a patch of bark on a tree, focusing on its cracks because looking anywhere else felt impossible. My body felt distant, like it had stepped away from me, leaving me behind to watch. I didn't fight the way people expect you to fight. I froze. My thoughts screamed while my limbs stayed still, uncooperative, heavy. Part of me kept waiting for it to stop on its own, for him to realize, for this misunderstanding to correct itself. It didn't. The forest didn't react. The trees didn't shift. The ground didn't open. Nature stayed indifferent, steady, as if nothing was wrong. That hurt more than I can explain. When it was over, there was no dramatic ending. No apology. No explanation. Just space. Just silence settling back into place like it had never left. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady. The world felt tilted, unfamiliar. He avoided looking at me. Or maybe I avoided looking at him. I'm not sure anymore. I walked away without saying anything. Each step felt mechanical, borrowed. I focused on the rhythm of my breathing, on putting one foot in front of the other. Behind me, the forest closed in again, hiding what had happened as easily as it had hidden us. By the time I reached the edge of the trees, the sunlight looked harsh, almost cruel. Everything appeared normal, too normal, and that's when it hit me, not all at once, but like a slow, spreading ache. Something irreversible had happened, not just to my body, but to trust, to friendship, to the version of myself who had walked into that forest believing nothing could go wrong. I don't remember the walk back clearly. Just fragments. The road stretching too long. My footsteps uneven, as if the ground itself didn't trust me to move straight. Cars passed in the distance, their sounds sharp and ordinary, and I hated them for it. The world hadn't paused. It hadn't noticed anything wrong. I reached home and closed the door behind me without making a sound. The quiet inside felt different from the quiet in the forest, thicker, heavier, pressing against my ears. I stood there for a moment, keys still in my hand, unsure of what came next. It felt like I had skipped a step in reality, like I was supposed to know how to act and somehow didn't. I went to the sink first. I don't know why. I turned on the water and held my hands beneath it, watching it run over my skin again and again. It didn't change anything. I washed them anyway. Then I washed them again. In the mirror above the sink, I avoided my own eyes. I focused instead on details that felt safer, the crack in the glass, the way the light flickered when the fan turned on. Looking at myself felt like an accusation I wasn't ready to answer. That was when the guilt crept in. Quiet, uninvited. It didn't make sense, and I knew that, but it settled anyway. A tight feeling in my chest. A voice whispering questions I didn't want to hear. Why did you go with him? Why didn't you leave sooner? Why didn't you scream? The questions circled endlessly, offering no relief, no resolution. And beneath all of it was something worse. The feeling that I had betrayed something. If there was someone waiting for me, someone who trusted me, loved me, the thought of them made my stomach twist. I hadn't chosen what happened, yet it felt like I had crossed a line I could never explain. Not to them, not to myself. Infidelity isn't always about desire. Sometimes it's about trust being broken in a way that poisons everything it touches. I checked my phone without meaning to. No new messages. His name sat there in my contacts like a threat. I didn't delete it. I didn't block it. I just stared, frozen between anger and fear and disbelief. That night, sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, the forest returned, not clearly, but in pieces. Shadows. Stillness. The feeling of being unheard. I lay there counting breaths, waiting for exhaustion to win. It didn't. By morning, I had made a decision without ever consciously choosing it. I would say nothing. Silence felt safer, cleaner, like something I could control when everything else had slipped away. I told myself I needed time. I told myself it would fade. That if I kept it buried, it would stay there. But even as I thought it, I knew the truth. Silence isn't empty, it's heavy, and I carried it with me everywhere, a secret that changed the way I moved through rooms, through conversations, through my own thoughts. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. Time moved forward because it always does, indifferent to what it drags along with it. Days stacked on top of each other, each one pretending to be normal. I followed along, learning how to function around the weight I carried, how to smile at the right moments, how to answer questions without revealing anything real. But the silence didn't stay quiet. It followed me into small moments. The pause before I spoke, the way my chest tightened when someone stood too close, the instinct to map every exit in a room. I became careful in ways I never used to be. Not visibly, just enough that I noticed. I saw him again, not in the forest, not somewhere private, just briefly, in a space where other people existed. He didn't approach me, didn't apologize, didn't pretend nothing had happened either. He avoided my eyes, and somehow that felt worse. As if what occurred between us was something unspeakable even to him, something better erased than acknowledged. That was when I realized something painful. I was the only one carrying it. The forest returned in my thoughts at odd times. The smell of wet leaves after rain. The sound of wind brushing against windows. Even the color green began to feel sharp, intrusive. Once, I walked past a park and felt my body tense before my mind understood why. I stopped walking, stood there longer than necessary, then turned away. I never went back. The question of telling someone stayed with me, always hovering just behind my thoughts. Some days it felt urgent, pressing against my ribs like it needed air. Other days it felt impossible, tangled with fear of not being believed, of being blamed, of watching the truth change the way people looked at me. And then there was another fear. What would happen if I stayed silent forever? Silence had protected me, yes. But it had also isolated me. It had created distance between who I was and who I appeared to be. Between what I felt and what I allowed myself to say. The cost of keeping the secret was paid daily, in small, exhausting installments. I began to understand that infidelity isn't only about breaking promises to others. Sometimes it's about betraying yourself, about swallowing your own truth to keep the peace, to avoid disruption, to survive. One evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the ground, I found myself thinking about that path in the forest. How it split without warning. How one step had taken me somewhere I never intended to go. Life felt like that now. A series of choices shaped by something I never chose. I don't know what I'll do next. Whether I'll speak, confront, or continue pretending that silence is enough. I only know that what happened didn't stay in the forest. It followed me out, and it still walks beside me, quiet, unresolved, waiting for a moment when I'm ready to decide whether silence will be the end of the story. Or just the beginning.